With your surprise, did you ever notice that it kind of like is a little left to the center? This is a song called Driving Sideways Down the Highway of Life.
All right, it was 1988, and I was in a band, and we wrote songs that we could play. Let's put it that way. And so we needed a place to play. We could play at the Fantasy Nightclub every once in a while, but we weren't popular enough to play there often. And so our drummer, John Walsh, started playing at this bar called Pat's in the Flats. And most of the customers in his band, the Pat's Hot Nights, were from the glass factory down the street. So one day, we saw this band, the Vivians, play in their dining room in South Euclid. It was their first gig, and we invited them to open for us. And they came down, and they actually brought some people with them, people who weren't workers at the glass factory. And the bar owner, Pat, was kind of impressed. And somehow, John Walsh got the job of booking bands there, alternative bands. Bands who didn't have any opportunities or any other places to play. And that's been going on for quite a while, and it's still kind of that way. I mean, there's clubs have come and gone, and there's been other opportunities, but if you're not a bartender at the Happy Dog, try getting a gig there. If you're not a bartender at the Beachland Ballroom, try getting a gig there. But Pat's is a place for bands to expose themselves, and it's been the birthplace of a lot of weirdo kind of bands, and some kind of crappy ones. But, you know, it's been an incubator for new music. Yeah. And so this is the story of Pat's in the Flats. And that's all I got to say.
Okay, I took over the running of the bar in 1969. There was after my brother was killed here in a holdup in January of '69, and my father took it really, really hard, and he passed away in March of '69. He took my mother to Florida because after Billy died, she was laying on a couch covered with a blanket every day. I mean, she wouldn't even get up. So my dad took her to Florida to get her going, and he passed away in Florida. So there's a whole year there that I can't tell you what happened because I don't remember. Other people worked with me, I can't tell you who, I don't know. The whole year was just a blank. So then, what happened then with being a holdup, if people, somebody was killed here, business went to nothing. Customers or people I knew for 20 years wouldn't stop. They walked past the front door and wave at me, but afraid to stop. So of course my mother wanted to sell because we were in a mess. And I told her, I said, well, give me 5 years, if I can turn it around, and then, you know, we'll sell within 5 years. So she argued with me constantly about that, but nonetheless, I stuck it out, and I did the first 5 years, and of course, she remembered that. She says, well, 5 years are up, what do you think? I said, well, no, it's starting to get better, it's starting to make some money. Well, I don't want to sell now. I mean, I got through the worst part. So we just went on like that, the daily business. So we opened at 5:30 in the morning for breakfast. The guys going to work. We'd serve them at lunch. Then we'd have them after work. They'd stop to have a few drinks, and we'd be done by 7 o'clock at night. That was we were strictly a working man's bar during the day. We had no night business. So that went on and on and on, and it went well. Then around 1985 probably, something like that, there was a couple of young men were working next door. And they came in and they said, you know, they have this band and they have no place to practice. I said, well, we're not open late, we've never done music, I don't know about all that. Well, come on, you know, a couple hours. I said, okay. So they came in and they two guitar players. We didn't have a drummer in the beginning. Three guitar players. Anyway, they wrote their own music. They had a great time and all that. And and then customers from the area, when they stop after work, well, they like to see that also, because then they got to sing with the guys, people that shouldn't be singing, and so it went on from there. And so a couple nights a week they would stop and practice, and that'd be fine. Then they found a drummer. That was John Walsh. So John Walsh came down, and he was drumming with them, and at the time I think he was working in a recording studio. So he mentioned, would you ever think about doing bands down there? I said, we're not working open at night. I don't know how that's going to be. Well, he said, give it a try. So he started out with some kind of battle of the bands, and then we went on with the band music from then. And it's been fun, it's been good, and some bad, some good, but I've enjoyed it. I still do, actually. Mm-hmm. Well, see, that's it. We never had the neighbors, were never our customers. Right. Particularly working men down here once third, then the band people. But from the beginning, we never had, like I said, customers coming down from top to the hill. They still don't. And they stick to their own, thing up there with the fancy drinks and all that. They come in and don't like what I have. Well, it's been a man's bar. There always was. Back in the 50s and 60s, there were no women down here. It was all the guys that were working. So you had what they would drink. So why should I change now? It's worked this many years. I like to keep it like that, plain and simple. If you're going to have something that covers up to the liquor with so many different things in it, then you shouldn't be drinking. Evidently, you like liquor anyway, so never mind.
I'm the John Walsh from Cleveland, not the John Walsh, but yeah, I play drums, long-term member of Summa, a bunch of other bands, and I guess I'm here to talk about my contribution to ruining Pat's. First, well, we have to go back to how I got involved with anybody who knew Pat. I knew Brad for quite a long time. And he said, hey, we're going to do this band. And it's really cool. We got this bar down in the flats that we get to play in. And but we rehearse early, and it's kind of like the show, and we can get some drinks and a little food. And it's really cool. You'll like it. So I dragged my drums down there, and we're practicing. And very cool band. Originals, some covers, lots and lots of fun. Our rehearsals became the show, and the show was from 6 to 8, 8:30, maybe as early as 5, depending, because the regulars that were coming in actually really liked what we were doing, and they hung out and they thought it was cool. When I started playing with the Hot Nights, so Summa wasn't exactly happy about that because, well, I was spreading my time. But on the other hand, there was a bright side of this of, hey, well, the owner's down there, maybe you can get us a gig. So with that peer pressure, I went and I said to Pat, hey, how about we do a band, but later, can we do this and it'll be a multi-band and it'll be really cool. We'll bring a bunch of people and you'll make money and it'll be great. And the first show was Summa, the Vivians, and I want to say I thought there was a third band on the bill, but for the life of me I can't remember.
First time we went and walked into Patson Flats, I remember this guy Paul Garrity, who we used to call Tall Paul. I don't know if you remember him, and came running like to the entrance. It was like, "Wow, you guys the Vivians?" He's like, "Can I help you with your stuff?" You know, it was like really like exciting. And we're like, "Yeah, man, you want to carry an amp? Go for it. Yeah, help out. That's great." So yeah, it was pretty fun. I felt very welcome there, you know, and and everybody being right in front of you really made you be a little more on your toes, you know, and the sound system being what it was, you kind of had to just, kind of know your shit, because you don't have, the good sound system to make the difference.
At that point in time, there was no place like Pat's for creative, original music. And some of it was really, really good. Some of it was absolutely horrendous. Of course, we did have the Battle of the Worst Bands there, which was part of the whole horrendous part, but we planned that. Sleazy Jesus. Sleazy Jesus was born in the Battle of the Worst Bands.
Well, the way we got involved in it was I was living in the firehouse in Tremont with Neil Peckler, and we were drinking really heavily one day and saw in the scene that they were going to have this Battle of the Worst Bands, so none of us really played anything, and someone had just made me buy a guitar about a month ago before that, so we decided we'd put a band together for it, and he had these two names, Sleazy Jesus, then the Splatter Pigs. He thought it would be great band names, so we put those together, and I had an old Ultravox drum machine that had Latin 1, 2, and 3 on it. So we ran that through a 100-watt bass amp, and that was our drummer. And then got Salinger, Mike Salinger, to basically be the guy who turned it on and off. And since he didn't have anything else to do, he would mix margaritas and stuff, and one time cooked tacos and gave them out at all the shows. But the first battle, we decided we'd do Latin 1, 2, 3, so we should always be a salsa band. We were like, well, that makes sense. And then we also, it was like right when hip hop was breaking, so we kind of wanted to bring in a gang influence, and we started thinking about West Side Story and how the really cool gang was the Latino gang. So we kind of combined that with like disco clothing. And I remember the first shows, I had like really long hair that was blonde and real thin. So I would go out and I'd dye it black with this really cheap dye. And by the end of the shows, it was like running down my neck, and it was just really terrible. But so we got Bill Davis, who played trombone. Lisa, at that time, his girlfriend, Lisa Maringer, to basically sing. I can't remember if she played guitar. I think she did. Who else was in it? Neil played bass, and then I played guitar and I sang. And we got a lead singer who was this, her name was Lori, I believe. I lost touch with her. I can't remember her last name. But she was a lawyer or in law school. And I think the reason we won the first one was she showed up with a short skirt and no underwear and kept dropping her microphone and bending over to pick it up. So basically we did like bad Rolling Stones covers and wrote some terrible songs. And we were absolutely horrible but funny. So we won the first round.
As the Battle of the Worst Bands in 1991, I think, and got together with a couple girlfriends that I had, and we decided to do it. Lisa Maringer, Rebecca Yodi, Rae Martello, and Daryl Whalen on drums. And it was a one-off deal. And I had been writing I'd always written stories for my daughter, Heather. And I kind of just put those to music. It was really fun. So everything, like, it was like a perfect storm. Like, I asked my daughter what we should name the band, and she said, name it after me. She was 6, and we did. But then there was the whole Heathers the movie tie-in, so we kind of pulled in that and like wore prom dresses, and we should have won, but we didn't. But it was so much fun, and we were all really young, and we just kept doing it, and we did it for, I don't know, Malcolm, we did it for like 15 years.
Did you ever play in any of the Battle of the Worst Bands?
I did. That's how I got in the Heathers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I think it was really before I knew Gina very well, and I think Lisa Maringer, the guitarist, had asked me about, that they were putting together a band for, Battle of the Worst Bands, and I was like, oh God, I'd never do that. I'm not playing. There's enough bad bands out there that think they're good. I'm not going to play in a band that says they're not good, or whatever. So I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And then Gina called me, and I didn't really know Gina all that well, and she told me Rebecca was going to be in the band, Lisa and Daryl, and I was like, really? Really? You girls and Daryl? Really? Well, who's the bass player? I said, if you don't have a bass player, I'd love to be the bass player. Can I be the bass player? And Gina kind of started laughing on the phone. She's like, well, I didn't think you'd be so excited about it. I'm like, are you kidding me? A chance to play with you girls? I'd love to. So that's how I ended up in the Heathers. And then that first, the Battle of the Worst Bands went horribly. Of course, we were expecting to win, so that we were planning on playing twice. So then when we didn't win, which I guess is probably a good thing, because we weren't the worst of the worst, we started doing like Vivian default gigs. We would get gigs, people would call it, that's back in the day where people actually called and said, hey, do you want to play? Not like now. But, we would get offered gigs, and, for one reason or another, somebody in the band, besides myself, wouldn't want to do it, so we'd give it to the Heathers. So then we started playing out, and people really liked it, so we just kept playing. And I was playing the Heathers 10 years. I know I was in the Vivians 10 years.
Battle of the Worst Bands was meant to be the epitome of what it was for a bad band. There was a band that was a really well-known metal band that wanted to play in this, but they just they couldn't use their name because it's like, but we got to do this, and it brought out everybody. I mean, and there was some real talent that was working really hard to sound really horrible. And I mean, when you have that level of competency, it was just magnificent.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Pat's in the Flats. I kind of want to talk about how, I got out of the Marine Corps in 1989, and I was writing music. And when I moved back to Cleveland, I wanted to kind of pursue music a little bit. So I moved back to Cleveland and started going to Cleveland State. And I listened to Cleveland State radio, and I was listening to shows like Cheap Heroin, Mike Cole's show, Blows Against the Empire, Steve Wainstead's shows.
Okay, this is the Pie in the Sky WERA traffic chapter. I see a little red light on the board. That means we're on the air here. Good evening, Cleveland. And tonight, well, it's a big traffic jam. One thing now, last week I said you should just pull over and stay down in the flats. Well, this week will be even.
That kind of music they're playing local music coupled with, bands from around the country. That's what I was into. And I think it was Steve Wainstead's show. I called up and won tickets to see Starvation Army at Pat's in the Flats. I didn't really have, anybody to take to it. So I took my Uncle Kenny. He was like 55 at the time. And, this was before they had all these, MapQuest and everything. So we drove around for about an hour and a half looking for Pat's. And when we finally pulled up to the building and found it, you know, the look on my uncle's face was precious because it was, you know, it was priceless. Just the building that was, you know, Pat's is kind of a beat down building. There's oil tanks around it and trucks going by and railroad tracks and, you know, with the gray Cleveland sky behind it. Just, you know, and then I went inside and the inside was just as good, you know, and I just kind of thought to myself, the aesthetic of the building and the people inside was really how I thought music should be presented, or my music and, you know, Cleveland music should be presented. So it just, I watched Starvation Army play. They were in the midst of doing their Execution Style album, which is an incredible album. And then just, you know, I went to many shows after that. After, you know, I think probably the next show I saw was Knife Dance, you know, and it was a Wolf Hour album. Tom Dark standing on top of a table, screaming, "I'm on fire," you know, "I'm on fire," and it was awesome, you know, a handful of people in there, you know, drinking cheap beer. I just loved it, you know, and I saw, you know, like Floydband after that, I think, you know, with Floyd tuning up his mannequin leg, doing Responsibility. Sasumi, you know, doing Art Party and Goodbye California. I think, you know, Sleazy Jesus and the Splatter Pigs doing Beer. The Heathers, False Hope, you know, the list goes on, and Psychobilly Cadillac. You know, I think a lot of the common thread of the bands at Pat's was there was a lot of comedy involved in the music, you know, because you kind of had a little rougher crowd, a drunker crowd, so to keep their attention, you know, whether it was intentional or not, the bands had a certain level of comedy, and that's what I wanted in my music. We had kind of my band, Bluto's Revenge, had a Three Stooges quality to it, you know, a lot of lowbrow humor in the songs with the physical comedy added in with the music. So, you know, it's what I was into, you know, and Pat's fit it perfectly. You know, my favorite memory of Pat's in the Flats was we got to, you know, you and Malcolm and John Walsh, you and John Walsh were booking Pat's, and you were gracious enough to let us open for No Means No, which was an alternative Tentacles band. And at the time, I really didn't know who they were, you know. So I just knew we were going to play an opening show, and we went there and we played and did real well. I had a guitar that wasn't working right, and I just threw it on the ground and grabbed another guitar, and, you know, you know, in my mind at the time, I thought, man, we really killed it. We killed this set. It was awesome, you know. And then John Wright of No Means, or one of the Wright brothers from No Means No came over and said, man, you got, you know, he complimented us on our enthusiasm and everything like that. And I thought, wow, we really did good. And then No Means No got off to play, and, like, you know, it was one of those shows where they were so good. They had just put out their fourth album, which was the wrong album, on Alternative Tentacles, and they were touring, a constant touring act, and they were just so effing good that people were paralyzed after you go to a show and the band is so good that after every song, just they just stood there with their jaws hanging open. They didn't know what to do. You know, everybody has a show like that in their life where, you know, the band is just so freaking good. You know, they went through Selections Off Wrong, and I think their encore was Real Love off of Small Parts, Isolated and Destroyed. And, you know, real love is scary. You try to hide, but it looks for you, and there's nothing you could do about real love. And the whole freaking building, Patches, it felt like the whole building was just going to shake off the foundation. Dun, dun, gung, gung, gung. It was just awesome, you know. I would have never have gotten that experience without, you know, Malcolm, John, and Pat, and it was just a great time. You know, I spent many nights watching wonderful shows there, many bands. It was fun, you know. I remember talking to Pat, and you know, my thoughts at the time were, this is musically, this is not her cup of tea. What was going on at Pat's is not her cup of tea, but she was a very gracious woman and lovely woman to talk to. And it you know, like, I'm not a spiritual person, but I don't think I found Pat's in the Flats on accident. It was one of those things that it was kind of meant to be. It was a meant to be thing for me. And you know, I remember Pat's dog Bud laying on the ground, just unaffected by all the crazy shenanigans that were taking place in her bar, and it was super fucking fun, man. And I just want to say thanks to Malcolm and John and Pat for having that experience. It was awesome.
Summa, and I'm a longtime member of the Floydband. It's a punk band in Cleveland, Ohio. And my very first gig with this band 20 some odd years ago, probably 28 or 9 years ago, was at Pat's. And Pat, starting off, she's a saint, she's a sweetheart, she's everybody's mother figure in punk rock in Cleveland back in the day. And so I'm a little kid from Parma, late teens, maybe 20, I don't know. And I hook up with this crazy punk rock band, and I got to tell you what, it changed my life, literally changed my life. Went down to the show, we played with this band called the Pink Holes, and the Pink Holes were kind of like at the top of their game at the time. And we had to play after them. So anybody in Cleveland that ever had to play after the Pink Holes know what that's like. They came out and destroyed it, they threw pink foam all over, people were falling on the ground. And again, being a little kid right out of high school from Parma, it sort of flipped me out. And literally changed my life. And so we had to play after him, and it was a shitty show, and I was nervous as hell, and half the crowd left, and so that was my first experience. Now let me say this, after playing in clubs in Cleveland for the past maybe 30 years, and I got a little rock club myself, which I sort of modeled after Pat's DIY strategy. That's always been our philosophy, and I learned it from her. But after playing all these bars and doing all of this stuff for the past number of years, it's still my favorite place in Cleveland to play. Every time I go down there, I have a great time. It's the vibe, it's the atmosphere, it's the history. And Pat's still doing it. And she's still got a little dog running around named Bud, I'm sure, and it might be the 4th or 5th Budweiser dog running around the bar. And there's still ketchup and mustard containers for the soap in the bathrooms. And they probably haven't mopped the floor since the last time we did it, when she made us do it because we trashed the place. And hopefully it never does change. So. All right, I got one little story about stealing from Pat's in the Flats in the kitchen. Danny Phillips, Danny, the drummer from the Floyd Band and from Starvation Army, he was kind of hungry, and we were changing in the kitchen, and Dan went on to steal this little case of shrimp. So this little case of shrimp probably had 1 million little shrimps in it, and for the next 2 weeks at Floyd's house, we had what we call Dan shrimp, courtesy of Pat's in the Flats. And it was delicious, and it's all we ate, and it made us all sick. But it was the middle of winter, and we had seafood. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. That was very
My name's Tom Dark. I used to play in the band Knife Dance from 85 up until 1990. And we put out a 12-inch EP, an album, and a 7-inch single, all on Hit and Run Records. So, but I'll tell you how we got into Pat's in the Flats. If I remember correctly, it was the Vivians were getting a show there, or shows, through you guys, Summa, and it was a new spot. And I remember correctly, the first time we went down there, our van was at the top of the hill, and we had to stop because there was a drag race going on. That was the first time we went into Pats and the Flats. We had to stop, and these guys were drag racing. And so we're like, okay, this was a great introduction to Pats and the Flats and rock and roll. And it was a small man's, working man's bar. And we walked in, it was just like, it was like walking into our practice space, but with a bar. And we met Pat, who was fantastic. And what we loved about it, as I said, was it was like being in your practice space and playing to your friends, but having your own little club in your practice space. And that's what I loved about it. And the sound was great. It's very raw. There was no stage. The stage was the floor, just like we have here. And at that time, before the internet and technology and cell phones, tons of people showed up. And I remember John and Pat ran ads in Scene magazine every week, so we knew what was going on there. That was the hot spot to go. And so people in droves just, you know, came there. And plus the parking was like unique in itself because it was right next door to a factory, and you had all those rigs, those trucks coming in at the same time. So even if you did park somewhere, we didn't know if it was a legit place to park. It was just like a combination of blue collar people and punk rock people or whoever was playing there. But through the years, Knife Dance played there. We did a lot of great shows with a lot of local bands, out of town bands. And even when Knife Dance broke up, and I still went there years later, it was just phenomenal that Pat, being as old as she is, sat through all these bands. No matter who, they were noise, they were surf, they were like avant-garde, whatever. She would just sit there with her arms folded and listen, and then take your order for beer, chips, or whatever, and that was that. And when Knife Dance played there, some things here and there, as you remember, Malcolm, probably got destroyed. Being tables, chairs, and God knows whatever else. Maybe some bodies here and there, but if nothing was destroyed, Pat would always compliment me and say, you did well, Tom. You didn't destroy anything tonight. So those were, I don't know, just phenomenal days, you know, and I'm glad I got to live throughout my youth, you know.
The other part of this is that because this had kind of run its course, Sunday nights, unless you had a strong band on Sunday nights, there was no point in even opening on a Sunday. Okay? We occasionally did Wednesdays and Thursdays. At one point, we were doing 5-7 nights a week. It was whatever the bar could actually stand physically to work that much. Because you got to remember, they were getting up for doing breakfasts for 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. So this was, Pat would go home at about 5:30, 6 o'clock and go take care of her mom and then rest, chill for a little bit. Shit would be happening and then she'd come back, you know. So it just, I started booking a little less and a little less, and then I had my own personal crash in my life, so that pretty much, yeah.
Hopefully at some point.
Yes, you know I love you. I'd do this all again. You want to do it again? Just like we did it before? Maybe not just like we did it before, but we could do it again. And I know I keep saying that, and every time I come down, we have a drink, and then we talk about the old times, and we have another drink, and then we remember how much work all that was, and then we have another drink. But I should come down again, and we should have another drink so that we can talk about how much work it was, and maybe we'll think about doing it again. Love you. Hey, I'm glad to see this is finally happening.
Laboratory floor. I've been searching for